Right, Yanko, what is your bad point? This is fire, by the way, Maui. I'll prep you for this one. 2 shows in a row now I'm going to have done when motherfuckers just be stepping forwards with simple, like, get down, Mr. President Nafany. Like, come on then, Yanko. What is the bad point? Hit me with this.
The bad point is Cloud9 removing Nafany over Hobbit.
Yes. Come on, hit me with it. Okay.
All right, so here it goes. It's like, in general, obviously, Cloud9 made a good change overall, but I think in light of that change, it would have been better if they have removed Hobbit and kept Nafany, or put Groove in a different role, sort of a bit of a higher like role, and brought someone who's more tactical and maybe a little bit more, in tune with the players on an emotional level. I don't know, maybe Fears from Forza. That was my suggestion. I think he could be a good fit. But the reason I say this is a couple of reasons, actually. Is first of all, there's like a role overlap in that team where you actually are missing a properly aggressive entry fragger like Nafany is, right? Because now you have Electronic, Hobbit, Perfecto sort of overlap. I mean, you want to put Exile and Electronic as your like lurkers on T side, right? Like 2 guys playing the sides of the map, and then you have Hobbit, Shiro, Perfecto. That just sounds a little bit weird to me, because I don't think either of those guys is like a natural sort of entry fragger. Then you also have the problem, wait, if Electronic is actually the in-game leader of this team, well, then he sort of has to be in the pack, right? So, okay, who do you put on the side? Then I think you can give that to Perfecto. I wouldn't give it to Hobbit, because he's been playing that role for Cloud9, and I feel he's been lacking, in the level of executing that role, and he's been struggling to find some frags that he needs to find, right, from those positions. And I think that's been the problem from Cloud9 in some games. So I think just overall, if you leave Nafany on that team, right, you remove Hobbit, it makes more sense role-wise. Now you have, and you could still, I also agree with Simple to an extent, where it's like, yeah, Electronic would be better, like, don't make him be the in-game leader, or like don't create it in a way where sort of he has to pick it up. Like, let him be the secondary caller, right? And let him focus still on his playing. I think he's an incredible player and still has like plenty of time left in him to be, that sort of a star rifler in his role, right? And then you have Nafany there who can do, the dirty work of having to call at the start of the round. But now we know Shiro talks a lot. We know Electronic is also very vocal. It's like, well, how much would he really have to do or be relied upon in those situations to make things happen, right? I think obviously has to be some sort of a problem, that there was there on a sort of a relationship side of things, with so many losses. I'm sure things soured between, Nafany and the rest of the team, and that was probably one of the factors why he was removed from the team. So, I'm not sure this would have been viable, but for the sake of argument, if that weren't the case, I think they would have been better off if they kept him. If they also, as I said, brought in a different coach where they can adjust their style at least a little bit, become a little bit more diverse, the same way that Navi became in 2021, I want to say, in the first half of the year, where they finally, realized, okay, we're playing way too slow, way too often. If we just sprinkle in some different things, we're going to be harder to read. And then those slow rounds are going to work even better, right? Like that happened for Navi, and they ended up being the best team of that year, won the major and everything. And for Cloud9, it doesn't seem to have clicked in the same extent. So yeah, I think, bad is a little bit harsh, but not as good as it could have been for Cloud9.
I'll say outright. Yeah, outright. If this Cloud9 roster clicks, they're gonna be the best team in the world. That's just what it is. I don't think that there is any doubt in my head that if the one question mark is what you bring up, that is Electronic going to be able to in-game lead this roster. But if he's able to just continue providing entry roles such as what Nafany did, if Hobbit's able to go in behind him as Hobbit did behind Nafany before, then this is such a massive upgrade that I don't even, like, it's not that I don't even, there's nothing to even really say if it works. I mean, if it works, then the proof's in the pudding right there. Nafany to me had to go because this was brought up by a handful of people. It's like, oh, I think this is happening. No, it was definitely happening. When Groove was calling in the online era, Nafany wasn't calling. Like, when you watch back the comms videos, Nafany wasn't even IGLing.
Okay.
It was Groove. So, like, that's why that's why I came up with the Nafany, because he wasn't even a caller when they were at their best. So I don't get like, whenever we saw them play on LAN after that, the mid-rounding was so bad. They never really had good conversions. They didn't know how to explode onto bomb sites. They could default well because they already knew what the default was, and that's how oftentimes they would win their T-side rounds. But anytime they had to make a mid-game adjustment, a mid-round adjustment, there was nothing there because Nafany never practiced doing that. When the team was good, everyone's like, but like, remember how good Nafany was when the online era, when he wasn't calling. He wasn't even calling at that time. So like, what was he good at? Was he good at just being a better entry fragger at that time? Like, that to me is where I still say to this day, Nafany isn't a bad player. He's a bad caller because he wasn't a caller. So for him to be thrust into the role, and then for him to say like in the exit interview he had, or like all of these, like, I would say, as he's exiting Cloud9, it has the same sentiment every time. You know, I'm taking all this info in from all these other people. I'm trying to put it together in my head, and you know, sometimes it's down to me. He does take ownership. He does take ownership because he does know he's the in-game leader. But he said that he had a really tough time with it, and he blames, you know, his age, his inexperience with the role. But it's like, his age is his youth is exacerbated by the fact that he wasn't even calling for the first couple of years with this team. It's so, like, it's basically like you're getting a brand new in-game leader once we made the switch from online to LAN. And it was a rookie in-game leader at that. If Groove had been a little bit more careful pre-switch to LAN, if he said, Nafany, you have to do a little bit more, because we were hearing about that. I remember like G2, I think it was Xtaz at the time, said, I'm not really calling live during rounds because once we switch back to LAN, I want to make sure that everybody's used to playing like we have LAN conditions. And Groove was basically keeping the training wheels on this Cloud9 roster for so long that it became so obvious that when Nafany had to do it all on his own, he was never capable. So for me, Electronic has already proven on LAN that he can mid-round better than Nafany. I think Blade's quote already rings out, where I didn't even want to really believe this at first, but after what Blade has shown time and time again with his knowledge of the game, saying that Electronic is a better caller than Boomich is at this point, I have full faith that Electronic
talk about setting the bar low.
Well, I mean, it's a major winning in-game leader that had to make some shot calls during high pressure moments, whereas we saw that Electronic had to do some as well over time, but Nafany has failed consistently when it comes to big moments, or actually many moments when he has to actually come up with an idea on the fly without Groove in a timeout.
Okay, but let me ask you this. You already said it, sort of, but do you believe he's good enough to just be a player on that lineup? And let's say Electronic calls, but he stays and does his role, because that's it's more natural for him to do it than anyone who's on this roster.
Well, there's a couple of positions that I think that they both handle well. Like, Electronic and Nafany are both kind of like point men when they're taking mid control on T side of Mirage. So I don't think it's necessarily that bad. I do see your point. I see that actually a way. Like, I actually threw out some ideas at some point where it's like, Nafany can stay on this team. I would just want a new in-game leader. I mean, before this whole Electronic move happened, I think maybe 6 months ago, I think I had the idea of like, you look at some of the other Eastern European in-game leaders and consider them to still play with Nafany. So those were people like Chopper or Jerry, who would, I think Jerry leads a little bit more from behind than Chopper. So like, that would have been a cool role where you would get Nafany to still run in first. You would have Jerry second, third in some side of the pack. And then, so for this lineup, yeah, I mean, I see it being viable, but to me, I am incredibly thankful that this is the roster that they're going with, because Hobbit has had a dip in form lately. I think, say, the past handful of months for him weren't too pretty. He was probably, the third. I'd still say he's the third best player, but it was such a steep drop off when he was like in the big three with Shiro and Axile before.
I'll just say this, even though Boomich is indeed technically, by all semantic rules, a major win in the IGL, his star player did have a 1.47 rating over the whole tournament, plays completely to his own set of rules and uses the AWP. So I'm just going to say, like, yeah, brilliant. Like, that is awesome. That's like saying, I was the point guard for Michael Jordan's teams that won. It's like, yeah, brilliant. Like, that means nothing about how good you are as a point guard, mate. So on the Nafany one, here's the funny thing. I can sort of agree a little bit with Yanko, which is this. to be fair, even your criticism of him, Maui, would actually potentially work with this lineup. So your criticism is he just essentially, they played that like jiggle peak style and just let his stars get the kills, and they went super slow because they were doing that, trying to peak angles a million times, and then they would just explode on the site, right? That could work insanely well with this roster of players. Like, he would have the most insane firepower ever to do that with. And also, I also agree, like, stylistically, he does somewhat balance out how passive some of the players are going to be, or where they're going to be on the map, crucially. Like Yanko says, it's the entry pack here, not necessarily, like, obviously people like Electronic and Axel can be entries, but they're not going to be the ones that go down the middle of the map and secure the map control. So there is that. With that said, on the online comms one, that's an interesting one. I didn't know that, actually. If you went back and checked the comms, you could see he's not coming, because that's hilarious. What that implies is Simple didn't do enough research on a language he can speak if he listened to the actual fucking comms, and he'd actually be talking sense and knowing what he was talking about. So basically, Simple should go away and do some research before he speaks publicly about things he doesn't know about, basically, because he was just doing that bozo thing of like, but I lost a lot of games to him, so he must be really good. Like, give me a... Mate, you've lost half the games to yourself. So you must actually be really good when you're really bad by that logic, you fucking moron. By the way, if you're ever wondering, I don't get it, Thorin. Like, privately, I'm config. Like, you're really nice to me. Oh, I'm Simple. I think we were friends. Like, yeah, privately, dumb fuck. I bet the Undertaker's brilliant in private, but if you come at him in a fucking match, he's going to throw you off the top of the cage at Hell in a Cell through a fucking announcer's table and win... Well, different tournament, but win WrestleMania anyway, and that's what it's like. Learn this fucking business, you dumb fucks. So anyway, then I just got this one last thing to say, which goes like this. I actually am a little bit sus about the move in terms of like personally, I just hope the idea for Electronic is I'm just not going to be the caller I was in Na'Vi. I'm just going to be fairly loose, and we're just going to sort of play around the fact we have this cracked out lineup of skilled players, and we're going to give actually, because it's what Nafany implied, he implied people like Shiro want to make their own calls. Brilliant. You know what? I love it when star players want to make their calls. So, all right, Shiro, step up. Time to make some calls. I know you and fucking Hobbit look like you're 15 years old. You're actually an adult now who's played a whole bunch of majors, a bunch of years. You've been a top player in the world. If you want to call some of your shots and you want to tell us that, go for it. Let's do it. And let's just have Electronic do a bit of calling, probably around the pack in the middle, basically, and then essentially get to frag himself, because that would be the dream. That would be the team Maui's talking about. That could be number one in the world. It looks fucking insane.
I think also just two small things. One is I hope they get more energy with Electronic and Perfecto coming in, because before it was pretty much only Nafany, right? And they would seem like too quiet, especially when they start losing. You look at them and the body language doesn't look good, doesn't look like they have it in them to close out the game. And the second thing is, like, when it comes to the setting up the team, like you said, Maui, yeah, Electronic can play in the pack as well and be the point man like he had to be in Navi, but originally he is like plays the side, like, so he's the A Palace guy, for example, on Mirage. Imagine a team in which on the extremities of the map you have Exile and Electronic. Like, that puts so much pressure on the CTs, right? Like, you know, like, if you're letting your guy have a 1v1, which you have to at some point and in a lot of times, right? Like, that's tough. Like, you have Kerrigan versus Exile on Mirage. I mean, he said as well, jokingly, in a couple of interviews when, you know, they lost to Cloud9 and Exile had a C game. He's like, yeah, he was just wrecking me. Usually you don't have two insane guys like that on either side of the map. So you can be like, okay, maybe, you know, we'll cheat a little bit more towards B because our guy on A can handle the one map. So I think, like, in that sort of a more macro sense, if you were, you know, if you could do that somehow, like, you would be able to put even more pressure. It would open up the map for you even more. But
yeah, pick your poison.
I think Simple is also saying this because he wants to keep beating Nafany, because he's never lost a BO3 to Nafany on
It's mind games,
like,
okay.
I don't understand it at all. Like, he's just like, oh, he's good. It's like the one time they beat them on LAN was like a CT side comeback in a BO1 at Rio. Like, so I mean, Simple's actually, yeah, it is mind games, because he just, you know, he wants to just make the worst team possible so he can keep beating.
I mean, it's like the joke I used to say, where of course all the players said Fifth Lion should have stayed in Nip. It's like, yeah, we want to actually fucking win. We don't want him bringing in some sick. See more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, you know, be a pleb and don't.